Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Donna Star, I am so excited about having you as my guest today on People in Transition. Ever since we first connected, I've been looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited too. There's nothing I like talking about more than talent acquisition and people and jobs.
Donna, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A lawyer. I just always liked the art of words, the art of writing, not the art of argument, but the art of defending your position and promoting your position. So I just always got a kick out of that level of conversation.
And Donna, what were the transition moments that you've experienced in your work life that has taken you from that point when you were a young child dreaming of being a lawyer to where you're at today?
That's a long answer, but I'm gonna definitely cut it down. I went to school many years ago to become a scientist. And I realized that that probably wasn't where my brain worked best. And then I transferred to business school, and then I got a job post-college at an ad agency related to jobs. We were one of the first recruitment advertising agencies in the Boston market. And that was happenstance. I mean, no one really knew what advertising for jobs was in the 80s. It was sort of an offshoot of marketing. And I started very early on, and I really liked it because I felt like when I was putting an ad in the paper, which is how far back I go, I wasn't just putting an ad for an RN in the paper. I was helping the company hire a position that would ultimately help the company. And I just knew early on that there was a lot to this whole idea of putting the right person in the right seat. And that was really the trajectory of my life, is spending 30 odd years working on the evolution of career development and finding the right person. First it was print, then I worked at the beginning stages of the internet with Monster Board. So I've really seen the evolution in the industry of talent acquisition and the shiny new object situation we all are faced with today, and the great resignation, now the great regret, and just the transitions that I've seen in the industry, and conversely my own, which is how I've grown up in the industry and then ultimately left to decide to become a coach, because what I liked the most about my career was helping people.
Donna, I'd like to first start talking about networking, the importance of that. What is the best way to leverage your network to support you in your job search?
So because I tend to coach people in transition or thinking about it, most people, when they start to think about a career search, they generally get somewhat paralyzed, maybe a little insecure, maybe even embarrassed. So they believe that their network may not actually even exist. and we all have networks. So I deal a lot with the pride aspect of looking for a job first. But then secondly, to me, LinkedIn is the grandparent of all networking sites. You have former colleagues, you have friends, you have neighbors. So everybody has a network. So I start there first with clients and tell them everybody has a network. And then we may even create a list together. Are there neighbors that you like? Are there people in your community that you feel comfortable with? Any associations you belong to? And then I might travel from there to LinkedIn, how to connect with people that you've previously worked with, or start following people and commenting and establishing relationships. So networking is hard for a lot of people, but it's available to you. You have a network already.
Donna, someone once told me that if you don't ask for help, if you don't reach out to your network, you're really denying that other person the opportunity and pleasure to support you. What are your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree with you more. And if I am working with a client, or even if it wasn't a client, and I say to them, if you are a good friend or a former colleague called you and asked for help, how would you respond? And they say, of course, I'd want to help. But people sort of lose sight of that when they're in their own moments of vulnerability. So what I would say is 100% agree with you, and people want to help other people, and don't deny them that ability to do so. That's why we're here on this earth.
Donna, you once told me that you should keep track of your accomplishments. What does that mean?
What I find with a lot of my clients, and I had 3 yesterday where this came up, so it must be the universe telling me that this is something to definitely lean into today, is we tend as humans to overlook the things that come easy to us and lament on the things that are hard to us. So for instance, I had a client who had a problematic new employee, and the CEO, not a fan early on, there was some sort of mishap. And she took it upon herself as the leader to turn this around. She felt like this employee had a lot of potential. And so on one of our calls, I said, so how's things going with Susie Smith? And she said, oh, great, doing a great job. And I said, let's hold the fort here. Do you look at this as an accomplishment? Is this something that you're going to write down for your performance review? And she said, no, I turned around, it's part of my job. No. So right there, perfect example of somebody overlooking their accomplishments. So one is, I think people tend to deflect. 2 is people tend to diminish the things they do well. I don't want to say men do that too, but I definitely see it overwhelmingly in women. And then 3, this list of accomplishments gives you, when you write it all down, you say, wow, I did all that. And it's also great for you as it relates to a performance review, a one-on-one, and specifically, since this is a lot of what we're talking about today, an interview. Just refreshing the accomplishments that you've had is just, I think, a great way to instigate confidence in yourself.
And so how does that look in the interviewing process? How do you use that and not sound boastful or egotistical? How do you use that list?
That's a great question. What I would say is I think interviews are more about storytelling, because if you're getting to the interview stage on paper, you have the requirements for the job, whether you're a CPA or you have 5 years of this or 10 years of that. So when if they ask you, if you get asked a question, which you will, on what's a project that you are particularly proud of, that's your opportunity to use one of your accomplishments as a highlight to why you might be a great fit for this job. So to me, it's very easy to work in your accomplishments, not in a boastful way, but in a realistic way as proof of the ability to do the job at hand.
Donna, you've talked with me about the power of choice. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. I think a lot of people come to coaching because they're stuck. So 2 of those appointments yesterday where people are like, I don't know what to do. And first of all, I don't know is never really the case. Sometimes you just can't get the words out, but that's not the question you asked me. So the power of choice, once I work with a client and we talk about what do you really want, people realize that they have more choices available to them than they originally thought of. And that is sort of the power of coaching, is seeing different perspectives. So a power of choice might be, I can't leave this job. I have to support my family, which of course on the surface makes perfect sense. But once you peel back the layers, you realize there probably are more choices available to you. I just got off the phone with somebody this morning who is having an issue with another employee. And She said, well, I just think I need to leave. Okay. What are some other opportunities available to you? Do you have a one-on-one with your boss? So we start to unravel the idea that there's only one choice available. You could have a conversation with your manager and say you're interested in additional learning opportunities or learning a new area of the business, or you want to leave. What choices do you have if you want to leave? How much savings do you have? Or do you want to look for a job while you have a job? Since we're talking about job search, those are some scenarios that we might walk through. But there's always more than one choice available. And that is my job, to help my clients see that there's more than that available to them.
Donna, why is looking at change, and transition in jobs is a change, why is looking through a negative lens during your job search not going to be helpful to you as a candidate?
I think looking through a negative lens is something we're just more comfortable with, right? We're comfortable with believing that we're not good enough, or it's just like a protective shell and mechanism. But beyond that, I think if you bring that negativity into an interview, you wear that. So that comes across in an interview. So coming up with a list of accomplishments, talking about what you really want, why you're a great fit, getting some stories down that you feel comfortable saying that you have accomplished, switches that negative lens to I believe in myself lens. And recruiters and humans pick that up, that transition from negativity to belief. And you don't want to walk around in the world with negativity. People pick up on that energy. And that doesn't mean some days we don't feel that way, but we want to have the ability to turn that around and be supportive of ourselves.
Donna, looking for a new great job opportunity is change. Why do you think that those candidates are resistive to that change? What's the emotion that they're going through?
I think fear is the underlying of all stuckness, even though that's not a word. Of course, it makes sense that people would be afraid to change the devil they know versus the devil they don't know. I want to leave this job. I'm not happy, but I like my colleagues, or I know what's expected of me, or there'll be more good days ahead. That whole idea of rationalization or tolerating just keeps you exactly where you are. Change, people talk about the personal growth industry and everybody thinks it's a panacea for let the good times roll. But the opposite is true, is that change is painful. It can be painful. It's not always painful, but change, if you wanted to lose weight, if you ate ice cream every day and then you had to take that out of your diet 4 out of the 5 days, that would be change. And it's not enjoyable all the time, but it's what you need to do to get to the next version of you, to get to the next job. So realizing that we're always in some sort of change, and if we really want what we say we want, change is required.
Talking about that personal growth, why should you take inventory of your skills to ensure that you're up to date and relevant for the chosen field that you're focusing your next opportunity on?
I feel like this is a little bit of a loaded question, so I want to answer this a couple different angles. One is, and again, I coach men and women alike, and I have 30 years in talent acquisition in my corporate job. You should take inventory of your skills, not only because you want to do those things moving forward. So if you're a CPA, what skills do you have? You need an inventory of what you're capable of or what you want to do in your next gig. So I think it's important to keep that inventory, but I also don't want that inventory to define you, right? Yes, you need some basic skills. You need to use Microsoft. It's helpful if you used software systems before. It's helpful if you know how to use the tools, and maybe even required for the next job. But there are other skills that are definitely important for your next job, and I don't want you to minimize those. It's not all about hard skills, it's also about human skills. So when I ask my clients to take inventory, it isn't only about their hard skills, whether or not they're not a CPA, whether or not they're an RN. It's also about how they help people, how they help companies. And those aren't always in the job descriptions.
Donna, kind of a follow-up question to that. Do you believe in the equation that curiosity leads to learning, which leads to relevancy? And if you do, what do you think the impact has on the job seeker?
Curiosity, to me, and I've said this in some of my writing, is like the magic potion for life. Curiosity is open, curious. Growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So I think curiosity always leads to relevancy because it means that you're open to change and learning new things. So to me, curiosity equals learning and learning equals relevancy, because we live in a dynamic world and you need to be able to adapt and flex, because the jobs of today are going to be different 10, 20 years from now. And we've already seen that with automation and some of the other industries that we've seen massive growth in. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Donna, if I'm in a search and I come from, let's say, a larger company, and I start looking at more smaller or medium-sized companies, or the reverse of that, I come from a smaller, medium-sized company, and I'm looking at larger ones. There's pluses and minuses just because of the size of the company. What have you seen in your work experience that a person that is moving from one size to the other size should keep in mind?
That's a really good question. And I don't think it's a one size fits all for sure. But big name companies, big brands, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies have their own sort of aura. And if you're going to work for them, they might have a more defined culture. They might have more definition in their positions. They might have more definition in their career growth and their career pathing. And in smaller companies, you may have a wider net of exposure. So it really depends what you're looking to do. I have one client now who wants to do brand safety and trust, and she wants to do it for a big name company because the larger companies have those departments. So sometimes I think it's a function of what you want out of the job. And sometimes I think that switch is a function of larger companies may have more customized departments or different levels. Like a trust and security is probably not going to happen at a 100-person company, but it may happen at a 1,000-person company, depending on the industry. So I think we have to get clear when we're talking about big, small, what the candidate is actually looking for, and then see if that lens fits with the companies they're applying to.
I've read before that companies hire not because of your cover letter or your resume or even the great interview you did, but rather how you can help them solve problems that they have. What does that mean to you, and how do you coach your clients regarding this concept?
I believe there's a lot more nuance to hiring than that. I think sometimes it's who you know, what you know, where you came from. I think there's more to it than that. But I think at the end of the day, hiring should be about the candidate that brings the most value to the job and the company. I don't always think it's that simple of an equation, from my experience.
And how do you help communicate the value that you might bring to that potential company?
I think interview prep and networking. Today you have Glassdoor, Career Bliss, you have LinkedIn, you have lots of places to go and learn as much about the company as possible, which was very different than when I looked for a job many, many moons ago. So I do think you have a lot available at your fingertips, even how the interviews go, sample questions, being prepared and really knowing that you want that job, that you are the right candidate and explaining why. So for one example, I had a client who was in the advertising and marketing space, and we were doing interview prep. I said, what's one campaign that you loved working on? And she gave me an example of the campaign. And I said, the recruiter doesn't care about the campaign. They care about what you learned from that experience. What were the metrics? Did the company make any changes as a result of this? So I try to take it a step further because that's how you show value to a company, the way you think. So when an interviewer asks you a question, do not answer the question on the surface. Think about the why behind the question. Why is the interviewer asking me this question? You have to think about the why behind the question, I guess is my short answer on that.
Don, is there anything that a candidate should not tell a recruiter or hiring manager that they should just stay away from?
Oh, that's such a good question, Bob. On the short answer, I think the answer for me is yes. There's a lot you shouldn't reveal in your first interview because you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you in many cases, right? If you're interviewing 4 or 5 companies or 3 companies, I think there's some things that you don't have to disclose right away, like how many days you want to be in the office, unless that comes up in the interview, whether or not you plan on having children, which of course you're not allowed to ask that question anyway. But I think there's some things you can wait and let the process unfold. If you have a deal breaker, an absolute deal breaker, I think you have to disclose that early and often because you don't want to waste anyone's time, including your own.
So let's say that you have a gap in your resume, or you're talking with Google and you came from small town USA company, something that is very obvious. Should the candidate bring that up so that they can kind of talk about that elephant in the room, or should they wait until the interviewer asks about it?
Well, I think you brought up a good point about a gap. I think gaps today are a little less problematic given the pandemic. And when you look at how many women have left the workforce, if you read the McKinsey report, which I would highly recommend, I think identifying issues in your resume up front in the interview is in your best interest, because you can play that as a strength. If you decide, and I have 2 clients that are in this process right now, that you wanted to leave work to spend more time with your kids, there's no shame in that game. So if you have a good story around that gap, get it out. You do not have to wait for the recruiter to ask that question.
Donna, explain to our listeners what, from your perspective, the Great Resignation is all about, and what does it mean to someone who is going through a job transition right now?
For me, the Great Resignation is probably one of the biggest sociological experiments in our lifetime, what we experienced during COVID, with workers trying to do, and more women than men, trying to do multiple jobs at once, to collapse their life into one thing. No separation between work and life. Advertising agencies, which is my background, advertising and software, had tons of business during the Great Resignation, during COVID. The amount of workload on people in retail was enormous. And so what you saw is that stress fracture of people saying, like, no mas, like, I can't do this anymore. And that was the Great Resignation. And companies were so desperate for help that they were offering enormous increases. And now the grass isn't always greener, and we'll hear much more about the great regret. So I have so much to say about this because of my talent acquisition background. This is when boomerang programs are so important, because hiring back an employee that may have left and you hire back a boomerang employee that knows the skills, knows the culture. It's like, for me, it's a slam dunk, unless they were a toxic employee, and better off for both parties not to come back. But for me, the Great Resignation was an experiment in, can I define work on my own terms? Because I don't want it defined for me. And I think the hybrid work environments are a true testament to workers being able to help define work of the future.
Is this a good time to be a candidate looking for that next great job opportunity?
Yes and no. Yes, unemployment is, I think, as of this recording, 3.6%. It's a strong labor market, which makes it very interesting from, are we in a recession or not? Because normally jobs will follow with recession, and that is not 100% the case. Although I do think the job growth is in certain industries like logistics. We're going into seasonal hiring soon in September, October timeframe. I do think it's a good time to look for a job. I think big tech has had some layoffs, Netflix and Spotify. I don't know about Spotify. So I think it depends what industry, but I still think it's a strong labor market and a strong time to look for a job, especially if you leverage your network, if we go back to question number 2.
Donna, I've heard you say before that there are always opportunities out there. Yes. And I have a friend that has been rejected for the 3rd time in a row. And it's pretty difficult for him to think that there is an opportunity for him. How would you coach my friend?
Yeah, I have coached people that have been knocked down. There's nothing really more soul crushing than job interviews where you're down to the final candidates and they keep on picking somebody else. So one way to look at it is, well, not keep on, but have at this point picked other candidates. So for me, that means if I'm being my optimistic coach self, or my belief in you self, it is that you just haven't found the right opportunity yet. And that is what I keep in my mind. What is the likelihood, if I was coaching your friend, that you will never work again? And when you pose that question, many people will say, I think I'm going to work again. So we got to keep trying, and we've got to keep learning at every step of the way. And I don't know about your friend, but if he's your friend, I'm sure you're coaching him well, is reflecting on those interviews that he hasn't gotten, how he actually felt about the interviews. Did he actually want them? And do we have to make some tweaks to the type of positions that he's applying for, the industries he's going for? So I think a lot of questions and a lot more better days ahead, you will eventually get a job, is 100% my mantra. I've had one client who was in pharma who had been fired from 2 jobs, one when she was ill. So she never thought she was going to work again. She thought she had been blackballed, and she's working. It took 18 months, but she got a job. I believe that everybody who wants to work again will work again.
Donna, should candidates honor their intuition while they're looking for a job? And if you believe that, What does that look like? How does that play out in their search?
Well, I am trained in intuition, so it's a funny question that you asked. I believe in intuition. So when you get, I don't know, sometimes you watch a horror movie. Did you ever watch The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo?
I did.
Okay, so there's a scene at the end where he asks, I forget the actor's name, but essentially the killer and the detective. And he invites him into the house. And then, of course, he traps him, tries to kill him. And the killer says to him, you knew, you felt that there was something wrong and you came in here anyway. If you leave an interview and you have a really bad feeling about that interview, that you should not work there, I would lean into that. I really believe that you get messages that your body tells you. And what does that look and feel like? Intuition is a hard thing to say. What does that look like? Intuition is something that says, I feel that this is not the right fit for me. You might have a physical sensation, a tightness in your chest, a stomach ache, sweating. I don't know how it manifests in other people, but I believe that intuition is a higher level of consciousness guiding you all the time. So for me, I listen. Now, I didn't always listen. That was an issue for me. And I think it's for a lot of people, but I believe in intuition.
Donna, you've described that there's a job out there for everyone. It may take some time, but there's a job out there. But sometimes the journey is a very difficult one. Any tips, techniques, thoughts that you can pass on to help the candidates stay motivated during their job search?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it is, and I have used the word soul crushing because you are, peddling yourself. Obviously, you want to get a job. You need to get a job for financial reasons and for your own sense of worth and self, which we work on when we coach. But sometimes you can step away. I know people say that job search is a full-time job, but just like when you need a vacation or you need a break or you need the weekend, it's okay to be kind to yourself and treat yourself well. What I think we are trained as humans is to beat ourselves up. I cannot rest until I get a job. I am not worthy until I get a job. And I work on that in my coaching practice because you're worthy regardless of whether you work or not. And you deserve self-care regardless of you got that job, whether you got that interview or not. Bringing your best self into the interview process and the energy required to complete that process, it's a requirement that you take care of yourself. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. So I think it's the opposite of the way people think about themselves when they're going through the job search.
Yeah, I tell my clients when they're in the job search, that's the time to eat better, sleep more, drink less, work out more, all of those things, because it is not only an emotional journey, but a physical journey as well.
Could not agree more. So if there's a time to take care of yourself and actually have a reset when you do start to feel better about yourself, you have maybe lost weight, you are sleeping better, you are exercising more, those things come across when you interview. And you can use that in your interview as like, I didn't realize what a gift this time was for me to just start taking care of myself. I feel so much better about myself. That is a powerful statement during an interview.
Donna, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone who's going through their own personal job transition?
There's so much literature, and I have lately been on a Brene Brown kick. So Dare to Lead and Atlas of the Heart, because during the job search process, and Atlas of the Heart is truly an atlas of emotions, but I don't think people realize the range of emotions that they go through, and that if you're angry, it might just be that you're hurt underneath. Like this is a damaging process to your psyche if you lost your job and you loved that job. So I think taking care of your emotions and validating them, even though I think perhaps you were asking me for like, is there a job search book out there that I would recommend? Not necessarily. I think reading for enjoyment, I think reading for curiosity, as you said earlier, and acknowledging the process you're going through. And that's why I like Brene Brown, because she talks about shame and vulnerability and gives some actionable steps. I might even do her training, Dare to Lead. But right now, that's sort of what's on my mind in terms of job search. I also like Mel Robbins very much. So she has the 5 seconds will change you, right? The power in the pause. So those are on my mind right now.
So many good books, so little time sometimes.
I know, that's how I feel. I just read Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, which is a hot book right now, which is just a therapist who's going through her own life trauma and how she responds to her clients. And, as a coach, I find that sort of interesting. So I'm reading that. I just finished that book over the weekend. And that was a really interesting book.
Donna, if our listeners take away 3 things from our discussion today, what are the 3 things that you want them to remember? You have a network.
You have a built-in network already, and don't be ashamed, embarrassed to use it. You would be that network for somebody else. It's okay to acknowledge that it is almost required for me to have my clients feel their feelings. We don't have to be a robot during this process. It's a tough process, as you said, Bob, to look for a job. And I know your friend has been looking. It's a tough process. So it's okay to feel the emotions. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. And then when you keep track of your accomplishments, it improves your confidence. And I think the underlying piece of job search and even just how we show up at work is to work on our confidence. And that helps us show up more positively. So those are my 3 things: is network, okay to feel your feelings, keep a list of your accomplishments, and this all drives greater level of confidence.
Donna Star, the many accomplishments that you've had over your work life, your coaching life, and your personal life really comes through as you talk about the number of tips and techniques in the job search. From my listeners, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with them. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really enjoyed every minute.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survive their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.